So this series is hosted by the Our Gem Coeur d'Alene Lake Collaborative. Our team includes representatives from the University of Idaho, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, Kootenai Environmental Alliance, Coeur d'Alene Chamber, and CDA 2030. We collectively author a series of articles in the Coeur d'Alene Press. So if you've enjoyed this series of presentations, you might enjoy those articles. You can find them at uidaho.edu/ourgem. We have all of them archived there. And then they come out about every 2 weeks in the Coeur d'Alene Press. So keep an eye out for those. As usual, we're going to save most of the questions for the end. We will be monitoring those questions as they come through. So if there's something that I think would help clarify what the presenters are talking about, I'll pause and go through those. But most of those will be saved for the end. You can ask questions using that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen or through the chat box. So we have today Rebecca Stevens with the Coeur d'Alene Tribe and Jamie Brunner with Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. And I will hand it over to Rebecca and Jamie to present.
Thanks, Marie. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Like Marie just said, thank you so much for participating in our online presentation series. It's really encouraging to see so many interested folks pertaining to the water quality in Coeur d'Alene Lake. So thanks for taking the time out of your lunch hour. Hopefully you're eating some lunch. As Marie mentioned, Rebecca Stevens for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe. I've been with the Lake Management Department for the tribe for about 15 years, and I am their Hazardous Waste Management Program Manager. So I represent the tribe's interests in the Superfund cleanup up in the Silver Valley, and I'm also the tribe's coordinator for the restoration partnership with the other natural resource trustees. So as most of you all and everyone that works in the environmental field, we wear a lot of hats, but yeah, that's who I am. Since time immemorial, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, or the Tsitsintsutmush, as they refer to themselves, those that were found here and placed here by the Creator, have always been the original natural resource managers in the basin, and they continue to be. They're patient people, and Coeur d'Alene Lake lies within the heart of their Aboriginal territories and is still very much at the heart of the people. So doing the work for the tribe in the Lake Management Department is very important. It's very rewarding, and I'm definitely honored to be able to help them with that. There's a quote here by Felix Aripa. He was one of our dear elders and an engineer for the tribe for many, many years. And Felix always had some crafty little quote. And you know, the Coeur d'Alenes still continue to believe that they live off the lake. Their souls and minds are here. And yeah, it's something that I think about every morning when I go to work and every day that I'm working for the Coeur d'Alenes. It would be very difficult to have this conversation with you all if we didn't touch on the history. I'm going to try to do it quickly here in just a couple of slides for those that might be new to the area that aren't aware of the historic mining that we have upstream from Coeur d'Alene Lake. In the late 1800s, gold and silver were discovered in the Silver Valley, and soon thereafter, logging and community establishments, railroads to get the silver and gold out were established. And you know, for about 100 years, if not more, mining really was the main focus of the Silver Valley. They were mining lead and zinc. And at one time, there was about 7.3 million tons of lead that was mined and about 2 million metric tons of zinc between 1883 and about 1997. This was really important when those ore bodies were discovered. The federal government at the time was, you know, going into the first World War I and then World War II, and the ore that was extracted out of the Silver Valley supported those war efforts. You'll see some historic photos here on this slide and some new photos. Mining is still active in the Silver Valley. There aren't nearly as many mines as there once were, but it is still a very prosperous industry. Mining practices have changed over the years, which is a good thing, because for most of the 20th century, The mining contaminated waste, we're talking about lead, arsenic, zinc, cadmium, to name a few. Those were discharged directly into the Coeur d'Alene River, the South Fork Coeur d'Alene River, which flowed down and met with the main stem there at Enaville and continued to flow down into Coeur d'Alene Lake. We've got about 83 million metric tons of contaminated sediment at the bottom of Coeur d'Alene Lake. And this is the issue that we have. You can't see it. When you look out and you look at beautiful Coeur d'Alene Lake, it glistens, and it's definitely being utilized as a hot recreation spot in the Pacific Northwest. But this is our history, and this is the legacy that we are left with and charged with doing something about. The tribe always thinks 7 generations ahead, and so for the time that we are here and employed by the Coeur d'Alenes, it is our duty to raise awareness and try to address these historic contaminants. On the left side photo, that's the Cataldo dredge. It operated from about 1938 to 1968. It was a collaborative effort by the upstream mining group. These mines occur in tight canyons, and they need water. So in order to get the mine tailings out, the byproduct, they would send it downstream, and they were starting to clog up portions of the South Fork Coeur d'Alene River. And so they collectively joined the upstream mining group and bought this dredge, and were dredging out that contaminated sediment that was clogging the river. Unfortunately, the only place to put it back then was into the adjacent floodplains. So that photo is actually at the Cataldo. If you're driving on I-90 eastbound, it'll be on the north side of I-90 where you see all those Phragmite plants growing and whatnot. High concentrations of lead, because at one time the efficiency of jigging, which was the mining style back at the time, it was pretty inefficient, and it recovered less than about 75% of the metals from the ore, which meant that these tailings contained quite a bit of those contaminants. The upper right photo is of the Bunker Hill Mining and Metallurgical Complex site. This is the Superfund site, as you might have heard. The site was listed in 1983 after there were concerns of the highest blood lead levels in children and pregnant women in the country. The act that oversees Superfund is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, or CERCLA. That was adopted in 1980, and so soon thereafter, we started seeing these Superfund sites being listed where hazardous substances have been released into the environment. One little factoid is what Superfund means, and it was actually a fund that was set up by the Environmental Protection Agency back in the 80s to tax potential future polluters in the event that there was a release of hazardous substances into the environment. So that was the initial fund that was used for these sites to address human health concerns and environmental concerns. So the site's been listed since '83. Work is still ongoing by EPA and the state of Idaho and the other federal and tribal trustees to clean up or remediate some of these areas where contaminants have come to be located. We've got a long way to go, but we've been at it for a long time. And for those that have been around and have seen the change, it is happening. However, we do still have these historic mine wastes coming down the lower Coeur d'Alene River and discharging into our gem, Coeur d'Alene Lake. The bottom right photo is the arrows pointing to the town of Harrison. That's where the Coeur d'Alene River discharges directly into the lake. And in a high water event, this was in May of 2008, in a high water event, you'll see those contaminants that are bound to sediment that are flowing down the river, they'll get resuspended. And so that's where you see that coloration indicating that there's suspended sediment. And unfortunately, this suspended sediment has high concentrations of lead and cadmium, arsenic, and zinc, mostly lead. The little plumes on the bottom right, the curls coming up, that's actually influence from the St. Joe River flowing north. Doesn't have nearly as high concentration, doesn't have the concentrations of heavy metals. It has its own issues, but you can kind of see how drastic that can be. And where we have this, there's a little text box at the bottom, that grab sample that was collected indicated about 20,000 parts per million lead in that one grab sample. The human health cleanup standard for the upper Coeur d'Alene Basin is 700 parts per million, and for the lower basin and ecological cleanup, it's 530 parts per million lead. So just a little indicator. Jamie and I are going to split this presentation up But I do need to at least mention that when the site was listed by EPA on the national priorities list in '83, in order for EPA to kind of get a grasp of how to address the contamination and identify remedial actions, they break up Superfund sites into operable units. And so the first operable unit was around Kellogg. You might have heard the 21 square mile box. So it's 3 miles high and 7 miles wide. And then that was the first operable unit. The most populated areas around that smelter, you can see in the photo. And then a couple years later, the non-populated areas outside of that site, there was another operable unit, and that was operable unit 2. Several years later, a third operable unit was issued for the site, which encompassed the entire area of which hazardous substances have come to be located, and it flows downstream all the way down to where the Spokane River meets the Columbia River. So that means that Coeur d'Alene Lake is in the middle of the Superfund site, and it always will be. That said, so this is a photo, or not a photo, this is a map of data that was collected by United States Geologic Survey of lakebed and riverbed sediments. The red part, that's the lower Coeur d'Alene River, and you can see in the bottom legend where it indicates concentrations higher than that cleanup standard of the 500 to 800 that I mentioned, 500 to 700. The reason why it could seem a little alarming because it's so red, but this data is considered, it's called Krieged data, K-R-I-E-G-E-D, where each of these little dots what makes up about 10 to 15 samples per that one dot. And so along the Coeur d'Alene River, those dots blended together. So that's why you see it as such. But this is a telling story of where we know there are concentrations of historic mine waste in our system. And this river continues to discharge into the lake until cleanup actions by EPA and others are employed in the lower river. We will continue to see those discharges into the lake. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, Jamie. And hand it over to you. Might be
on. Jamie.
Sorry about that. I'm working on it. There we go. There's the video. Now I can share screen. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Brunner, and as Marie said, I work for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. And my title there is the Coeur d'Alene Lake Management Plan Supervisor for the state of Idaho. And so if I can get this share screen to work, I will continue the slideshow. There we go. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if I'm too quiet or too loud, feel free, Marie or Rebecca or somebody, to chime in and just let me know, because sometimes I feel like I'm yelling, but I'm not sure how loud that is for you all. So as Rebecca summarized, we have this Superfund site upstream in the Coeur d'Alene River Basin, and the Coeur d'Alene Lake is part of that Superfund site, but there's not a remedy that was identified under CERCLA. And so we have this Coeur d'Alene Lake Management Plan, and the goal of that plan is to maintain the health of Coeur d'Alene Lake by managing watershed nutrient inputs. And for those of you that tuned in last week to Dr. Wilhelm's Limnology 101, he talked about how you want to keep a healthy level of oxygen in those bottom waters at the bottom of the lake in order to keep some of those contaminants locked down in those bottom sediments, including more phosphorus, which is the nutrient that we're primarily managing for. So we want to manage nutrient inputs so that we can manage healthy oxygen, so that we can manage those metals in place in the lake bed sediments. That's essentially the goal of our plan. So the plan is different. It's kind of an anomaly in the water quality world in that it's, like I said, it's not under CERCLA or Superfund. Nutrients aren't a contaminant of concern in the cleanup or remedial activities further upstream in the basin. and it doesn't fall under the Clean Water Act provisions for developing a TMDL. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load, which is essentially a tool that the state and the tribe can use under the Clean Water Act. It's essentially a pollutant budget, so we can identify water bodies that are impaired by a particular pollutant. We can establish how much of that pollutant is in the water and then create a budget on how much we need to reduce that pollutant in order to meet water quality standards. Well, in this case, we want to manage nutrients, but Coeur d'Alene Lake isn't listed as impaired by nutrients, specifically under the Clean Water Act, and so there's no TMDL that applies to this particular case. We are listed for metals in the lake because of the upstream activities that are being addressed through CERCLA, but we are not listed for nutrients. And so somewhere in the gray area between these two regulatory authorities is this alternative solution that was driven locally by stakeholders who wanted to keep lake management in the hands of local stakeholders and local decision makers. And so EPA deferred the remedy on the lake to see if this lake management plan approach could be the right way to go about it. So in order to meet our goal of managing those nutrients, to manage the oxygen, to manage the metals, we have these 5 objectives. We obviously want to know what's going on in the lake, and so we do regular monitoring of the water quality and some modeling of that. Partnerships we rely heavily upon because there are numerous decision makers throughout the basin that influence water quality, because the land use in the basin influences that water quality. And so anybody who makes decisions in the basin will influence that. In order to manage nutrients, we want to develop a reduction action plan. How are we going to reduce that phosphorus input? We want to have a public awareness about the issue, and of course, any big effort requires funding. So those are the 5 objectives to lead us to that goal. And so before I get into that first objective of our scientific understanding, at the bottom of this slide, you see a website. It's kind of long, so I'm going to dwell on this for just a moment, but there we go. So this is the DEQ Coeur d'Alene Lake Management web page, and you can see in the lower right there are monitoring reports. So you'll see these 2 monitoring reports, but the next slide I'm going to show kind of summarizes really quick and dirty, but there's a lot of information in those reports. And so if you want more detail, I would encourage you to go to that web page, look at those monitoring reports, and there's also a copy of our nutrient inventory report on this web page. And so in the next slide, when I talk about trends, we're looking at trends because we have triggers that are identified in the lake management plan under our science objectives that say, okay, with the different water quality parameters that we're measuring, like dissolved oxygen, phosphorus, metals, things like that, at what point do we sound the alarm and look a little deeper to see if we're reaching a tipping point that we want to avoid? And so these trends are our way of tracking how close we are to those triggers or if we're approaching them or not. And so just to keep that in mind, again, I can put this slide up later if folks want to get this website address down later, or feel free to contact me and I can get you a link to this, or if you Google Idaho DEQ Lake Management, it'll bring you to this page through Google. So with that, we'll go through some of the trends. So most of the information on this slide will be from data that we've collected from 2004 to 2015, which is our prior assessment. Since then, we've had an update to that includes 2015 to 2018 data. And so when we get to the chlorophyll A and dissolved oxygen, that will go into that more recent data because that's where we did see a slight change in the trend. But you'll see at the top, C1 is up there by Tubbs Hill. C4 is University Point. These are the 2 sites that the state of Idaho monitors for water quality at various steps. And then C5 and C6 are down in the Coeur d'Alene tribe's jurisdiction. And so that we jointly monitor the entire lake at various steps and various stations to get an idea of how the trends are looking. So for dissolved zinc, we are seeing, and you'll see here in the middle, the Coeur d'Alene River comes in. That's where the source of all these contaminated wastes are coming in to the lake, and generally flows north past C4 and C1 because the St. Joe River down here in the southern end also flows north, and all of it eventually outlets to the Spokane River. So as this water moves north, in the north end, we see a decrease in dissolved zinc in response to the remedial actions that EPA, DEQ, tribal and federal partners are working on. So we would expect to see that. South of the river, we kind of see some variability, not a strong trend in zinc at C5, and then there's really not a lot of influence down in the Chacolette area with dissolved zinc, again, because of the dynamics of the water generally flowing north. Dissolved cadmium, it's kind of the same pattern, although we do see a little more fluctuation at C5 with the dissolved cadmium south of the Coeur d'Alene River. Dissolved lead, we are seeing an increase in some places. Just a little note here, and this is a slide from my coworker Craig Cooper, who's our limnologist, and so I have to give him credit for this slide. This is compiling a lot of data into one slide. But his note here is that the total lead is lower than the 90s, but what we're tracking dissolved lead with our triggers, and so when you look at dissolved trends, this is what we're seeing here, is a slight increase in dissolved lead, and it varies with the depth, but in general, we are seeing an increase north of the Coeur d'Alene River. Not a strong trend at C5, just south of the river, and again, C6 doesn't see a lot of influence from these dissolved metals in our trend data. Looking at total phosphorus, we are seeing an increase in total phosphorus in the northern end, and actually 2018, we had one of the highest, I think it might be the highest level of total phosphorus that we've seen in our data record. And so it's a little bit alarming, and we're looking at low levels of phosphorus, but it doesn't take much phosphorus to make an impact, and so we're keeping an eye on that. In the southern end of the lake, we're actually seeing some decrease or not a strong trend. Chlorophyll A, so this is the primary productivity, the green stuff in plants that takes energy from the sun and feeds the whole productivity of the system, and this is what drives the oxygen levels in that bottom water. So we're seeing, so this is encompassing data through 2018. It doesn't end at 2015 because we did see a slight shift in the trends. As of 2015, we were starting to see a trend in chlorophyll A increasing, and now that trend has kind of flattened out. It's not a statistically significant trend in the northern end. So in the southern end, we do see an increase in chlorophyll A still. And then I can move my window here because I'm blocking my screen. Oxygen, it's kind of the same thing. As previously we were starting to see some decline in dissolved oxygen in the bottom waters in the northern end of the lake, and now that trend has kind of flattened out. And then in the lower end of the lake, you'll see not a real strong trend or kind of a flat curve, and then actually a bit of a reduction in dissolved oxygen in the far southern end of the lake. So moving on to objective 2, partnerships, just kind of a smattering of an example of what that means. Like I said, we rely on partnerships for implementation of some of these nutrient reductions. In the back of the lake management plan, in the appendix, there are management action tables that lay out particular actions that can be done or need to be done or have been identified both by those decision-making authorities as things that can be done into the future to manage nutrient inputs into the lake. And so there's different categories of land uses. There are a lot of different players listed in there, and I would encourage you to take a look at the lake management plan online on my webpage I showed you if you want to see those in detail. We also have a partnership with Avista Utilities. They operate the Post Falls Dam, and in order to do that, they had to have a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license, a FERC license, in order to operate that dam. And part of that the requirements associated with that has them on the hook for providing some funding to help with erosion control and in some of the part of the watershed that their operations impact. They have fisheries enhancement, wetland enhancement, and nutrient monitoring funds that they provide, and we partner with them on all those activities with the combined goal of protecting the lake. There's a restoration plan that Rebecca could probably give you more detail on this, but essentially it's a plan that is a potential source of funding for water quality and habitat improvement projects throughout the basin. We also coordinate with our partners with the CERCLA efforts upstream, the Superfund efforts in their remediation activities and cleanup. And then more recently, so we've had 4 different IRGEM Coeur d'Alene Lake symposia to share out the science and the information that we know with the general public and our stakeholders. And the last of those was in November of 2019. And at that symposium, we had really good momentum built up. And so a group of us wanted to keep that momentum going. University of Idaho, CVA 2030, Kootenai Environmental Alliance, CEQ, and the Tribe have been, and as this series is part of that, have been trying to keep that momentum and keep our gem, Coeur d'Alene Lake, in the public's eye through a series of articles in the press and this speaker series. And so we've been trying to keep that momentum going. And as things progress, we will reach out to the broader stakeholder group that is the RGEM Collaborative and those decision makers, which is everybody in the Coeur d'Alene Basin, and share out information as we have that information to share. Objective 3, the Nutrient Reduction Action Plan. The first step was to develop an inventory. Where are all the nutrients coming from? What we determined was about 3/4 of the nutrients, the total annual load, is coming from the two large rivers, the St. Joe and the Coeur d'Alene River basins. And what we also found out is that we don't have a good handle on the amount of phosphorus load that's coming from those tributaries around the face drainages to the lake. So those smaller tributaries that drain directly to Coeur d'Alene Lake. We are working now to fill those data gaps. We're doing some water quality monitoring to get a handle on that so that we can help inform further those decision makers in the basin to try and figure out, okay, if we're going to put resources to reduce nutrients geographically, where are the hot spots that we should focus on? So that's kind of the goal in that. Increasing public awareness. We have a variety of different programs we utilize. Lakeshore Assessment System is a toolbox for landowners. It says Lakeshore because it began, with a focus on lakeshore landowners, but really applies to any property in the basin because it all eventually will drain to Coeur d'Alene Lake. Panhandle SEEP, or Stormwater and Erosion Education Program, is geared towards educating the development community on ways to protect water quality. We have a realtor training that talks about shoreline regulations. Bay Watchers is a collaboration with the University of Idaho we have this training that we provide for liaisons, communities, the citizens throughout the communities that are interested can come to this training, learn about what we do as agencies, tribe, and regulators. And then we also hear back from those community members, like what do their neighborhoods want to hear more about. And then there's also an opportunity for some citizen science to help us collect some of that data that is so useful in monitoring the lake. We also participate in the Confluence Project, which is a high school program that takes students through the whole school year, hands-on, place-based learning related to water quality and quantity that culminates usually in most years in a youth water summit where students get to pick a project and present posters on a water-related or climate-related project. And then again, the RGEM Coeur d'Alene Lake Collaborative that I mentioned as our current education subgroup, but is also the larger stakeholder group of the basin that we have symposia and things like the speaker series. So where are we currently? So you may have heard in the news that there's a question out there, is the lake management plan as it's currently being implemented enough? As I mentioned earlier, we are approaching where our trends are going in directions we don't necessarily want to see. We don't want to see the phosphorus picking up. We don't want to see oxygen declining. We have had challenges in the past with full support from all of our stakeholders. In some cases, we've been challenged with our science maybe not being totally accurate. So there have been some challenges in the past as far as progress forward with the lake management plan. The tribe has declared that they don't believe the lake management plan in and of itself, the way it's being implemented currently, is enough. And also, as a response to the triggers and trends, the state has called for a third-party review of lake management data and activities to date to kind of help inform us where we're going from this point forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Rebecca for the last handful of slides. But I will still be available if you have any questions specifically for me. I will be tuned in.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay. Okay, so kind of twist this a little bit, not knowing who the audience is, but Jamie queued it up. There's a lot of history here, and a lot of correspondence back and forth with EPA and the state of Idaho, Department of Environmental Quality on the lake management plan and how we're going to address the contamination moving forward. Some folks might have reacted to the recent news that the tribe withdrew from the lake management plan as it's currently being implemented as a negative thing, but the tribe has been very patient over the years, and there's been a lot of correspondence and information sharing and data sharing with all the stakeholders. The trends report and the update that Jamie had mentioned has been shared with all the county commissioners that have any interest in Coeur d'Alene Lake, so Kootenai, Shoshone, and Benawa, the natural resource committees with those counties, the Basin Environmental Improvement Project Commission, the technical leadership group that works with them, and not too much feedback over the years that these reports have been shared. We could see these triggers being exceeded, and something that the lake management plan did point to is that if we do see those triggers being exceeded, we are going to call for action. So in August, it first kicked off in August of 2018 that the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Council invited Region 10 EPA Administrator and Idaho Department of Environmental Quality Director to meet with council and our limnologists to go over the data and the concerns that the tribe was seeing. And then after a handful of months, it wasn't until April of 2019 that the tribe submitted an official letter to EPA and DEQ withdrawing from the lake management plan. And this included a critique of the lake management plan. This is not just a back of a napkin exercise. The scientists in our lake management department really dug deep into the lake management plan and put together a critique of that for our leadership. It was May of 2019 that EPA responded to the tribe and said, we understand, we can see your concerns, and we think that DEQ needs to do a similar critique of the LMP, much like the tribe did. In September, so several months later, the Governor Little did respond to the tribe and to EPA, but with a response to initiate a request to have the National Academy of Sciences come in and do a third-party review of the tribes and the state's water quality data. Then in May, they came back to the governor. Studies of this nature are not, they're not cheap. They take a lot of resources, a lot of professionals in the scientific community. And so the governor reached out to the tribe and EPA requesting some funding support for that effort. Unfortunately, over the last several years, if not decades, the tribe is unable to support that effort at this time. And so we responded that, we support Idaho moving forward with seeking that NAS review. And then May of 2020, well, I guess there was a response that EPA had provided to the state of Idaho with that same, question that was posed to them. EPA, can you help provide funding to support this NAS review? And EPA came back in July of this summer stating that this is a Clean Water Act issue and that the state should look at other federal funding sources outside of CERCLA to support this NAS review. This obviously goes back to the concerns that the tribe has had on that collision of Clean Water Act and CERCLA and whose responsibility is it type of thing. So the challenges, lack of funding. We've exhausted our settlement dollars that have really supported, the scientific analysis of the lake. We're doing as much as we can. We're going to continue monitoring water quality. It's very important to keep our finger on the pulse there, and with the minimal outreach efforts we can do, we're just trying to embrace and work with the communities on that. There was that stigma back in the day of having Superfund and EPA come and employ their CERCLA authorities over the lake, but that sentiment is changing. We're hearing that, and so that's hopefully why some of you are here today with us. The tribe does have some concerns with some of the upgrades that EPA is working on up in the Silver Valley at the Central Treatment Plant in Central Impoundment area. It's one of the original repositories just below the Bunker Hill mine. They are upgrading it to remove contaminants of concern, which is a good thing, but the tribe continues to have concerns on the phosphorus loading that is moving through that repository and through the groundwater and then being discharged out into the river. So we have had verbal commitment from EPA that they will monitor for that, But as far as treating that, phosphorus is still an uncertainty. Already mentioned the Clean Water Act versus CERCLA. It's definitely happening. The lack of some of the regulations that you see in other lake communities has always been a concern. For those of you that tuned in last week to David Callahan's presentation, he had some tough questions that were asked, and enforcement of the minimal 25-foot setback, which is on a slope, has been challenging. That has been the only protective ribbon around Coeur d'Alene Lake shoreline. As Jamie mentioned, this is not just shoreline influences on water quality. This is basin wide. We have all the different land uses that have an influence on surface water and lakes. One of the examples being the Forest Practices Act. There have been some concerns that maybe it's some of those actions or best management practices aren't as protective for surface water as they could be. And it can be quite challenging going through a rulemaking change through the state system for updating that Forest Practices Act. And so we're constantly looking at all the things in the landscape that might be improved upon. And then EPA did come in and do an optimization review of some of the tribe and state's data. It was a quick turnaround, whereas we have some concerns that not the full data set was included due to some uploading of data challenges that we see out of EPA headquarters into the STORET, used to be WQX. This continues to be a challenge that we've elevated to the national level as tribes in Indian country collect a lot of data for their own resources. And if it's not being analyzed and looked at by our federal trustees during these optimization reviews, then it's the results or recommendations that come out of those reviews might not be the best direction. And then lastly, not lastly, but another one, EPA is conducting their 5-year review of their upstream remedial activities. This is something that occurs in Superfund sites nationwide. Every 5 years, they review their actions and see if they're meeting their remedial action objectives. Since the lake does not have a current remedy associated with it, this continues to be a concern how EPA is going to address the hazardous substances that remain at the bottom of the lake. Moving forward, obviously with those letters flashing through, we're constantly in dialogue, whether it be a quick turnaround or not. It's just something that we're not going to stop pursuing. Jamie mentioned, and I think I repeated, the third-party review by the National Academy of Sciences. We are always striving to increase our coordination with counties, cities, municipalities throughout the entire basin. I mean, we'll go all the way up to Calder and Avery if we need to, just to work with those folks as they're upstreamers. We're always willing to work with our stakeholders and partners.
Hey, Rebecca, can I chime in there just for a second?
Please do.
Okay, so I just want to touch on this third-party review of the National Academy. It's expensive, like Rebecca said, and I just have to say thank you to Kootenai County. We did not solicit counties participating in funding this third-party review, but Kootenai County did vote recently to chip in on that to the tune of about a quarter of the cost. So it's a pretty good chunk of change, and we really do appreciate that because the state of Idaho is going to move forward with it regardless. It's just makes it a lot easier, and it it's a good show of the partnership from Kootenai County. So we really do appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, that is a big deal. We haven't seen that before, so thank you to Kootenai County. We're always trying to increase program coordination because of the limited resources that we do have. Just a couple of examples of on-the-ground projects that our goal is to reduce excessive nutrients coming into the lake would be the Wolf Lodge Restoration Creek work that's going on. That work will be underway here soon, and Jamie and her colleagues can talk more about that. Stream bank stabilization, mostly in riparian plantings. There are also a number of restoration projects down on the reservation in Binawa Creek, as well as Lake Creek, which those projects are restoring habitat. But when you're restoring habitat and bringing in, natural features and vegetation, you are slowing water down and slowing down the sediments that can move through those systems. So albeit those projects might seem small in the landscape, they're what we can do with the resources we have. We are always looking for more projects, so please stay in touch with us if you have any ideas. And, you know, the big question is still, is the LMP enough? I know it might be a hard pill to swallow that one of the sovereign governments that's been here for thousands and thousands of years is questioning it, but it's where we're at, and it's very important for us all as stakeholders to protect Coeur d'Alene Lake and our gem. So with that, I will put this up for our contact info and turn it back to you, Marie. Yep.
Thank you so much to both of you. So feel free to send in questions using that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We do have one question. Pull it down here. Have you mapped residential and other development, increased or modified septic, any effect on chlorophyll oxygen levels?
I can attempt to speak to that a little bit. So we being, it wasn't me at the time because I wasn't here yet, but I do know there was some shoreline inventory that was done. Rebecca, I believe, was a part of that. I think it was back in 2000, was it 2006?
2007, 2008, because then it resulted in the 2009 Lake Management Plan.
Okay, so I don't believe we've done a follow-up to that to track any change at that point. We have tried to do some quantification of the number of septic systems that are within a certain distance from the shoreline, but the challenge with that is we only have records back as far as they were permitting septic systems, and so anything back before then, there are no records of. And as far as relating those to any effects on chlorophyll and oxygen levels, it's really hard to pinpoint the cause and effect in a localized sort of thing. What we're monitoring primarily with the lake management activities is overall lake trends in the open water. And so detecting something from a specific bay in the open water quality, for example, out at University Point, making a correlation between those two things would take a more focused and specialized study. So no, we don't have that level of resolution on our data. We spend a lot of time collecting and analyzing data, and it's as much as we can do to just keep a handle on long-term trends of the lake overall at those locations. So no, I guess we don't have that level of resolution. But if there's interest in funding available for some specialized studies, if we can come up with like areas that we feel require that or warrant that, then I would be open to considering that for sure.
Okay. When metals are resuspended, how far up the water column do they travel, and can they be detected by the naked eye?
To my knowledge, they cannot be detected by the naked eye. And I think that's something that as far as how far up the water column they move, we're not sure yet, because that's something that we're hoping that our water quality monitoring data will feed into our modeling data so that we can model that before it happens so that we know. So it's a long-winded way of saying we don't know for sure. And that would be a good question for our limnologists, because they have a much better understanding over those dynamics. And maybe there's somebody else on here that has a better chemistry knowledge base than I do. But the short answer is we don't know exactly.
But it's a great question, and when the benthic flux issue has started coming up with USGS looking at that, I recall in some more shallow waters that where lead does get resuspended, it does move up a certain amount of distance depending on where in the lake bed, but then it gets too heavy and sinks again. But there is a full-blown geochemistry analysis of that process that if you're interested, please email Marie and we'll get it to you.
We have a question. What is the cost for the third-party NAS review of data? And how long will a third-party review of IDEQ and tribal water quality data take?
It is in the realm of about $800,000 based on the most recent proposal. And the timeline, just going off of memory, it was between 18 months to 2 years. I think it might be like in between 18 months to 2 years. And so we're expecting within 2 years, we will have some sort of final report on that.
Okay. We have a
And
question.
can I add that to that? We do expect to utilize this OurGEM collaborative education subgroup and the networks that we've started to establish through it to disseminate some of that information as we go. And so there may be some meetings or updates that we can hold between now and then to, there is a public engagement component to that proposal. And so we do expect that it's not going to be the whole 18 months to 2 years before the general public and the basin stakeholders hear something back on that. We fully intend to have engagement throughout the community during the process.
We have a question that the letters that Rebecca showed represent an excellent history of recent documents with the LMP. Are those letters publicly available from one convenient source?
I can help you out with those, Jim. Quick answer.
There's another question. What will be the ultimate tipping point to move to the Superfund option?
I don't know that that's well defined or defined at all. I think there are a lot of moving parts in that question. It's a really good question because I think we're asking ourselves that as a community as well. I think, on the slides we had, historically there was a fear of the Superfund stigma. At the last OurGEM symposium, we did feel a different sentiment kind of coming out of that group anyway. I don't know if the larger community feels the same way, but I do encourage anybody who has feelings about Superfund versus Clean Water Act versus lake management, whatever it is, as EPA is putting together their 5-year review, I think you could reach out to those EPA folks and give them your thoughts on that, and they would consider that. And the state and the tribe, reach out to your representatives and communicate how you feel about it, because part of that tipping point is the sentiment of the stakeholders involved and the people, the voting public. Like, what does the community want to see, and where is that tipping point?
Yeah, and I'd like to just add to that's a really hard question for the tribe here. When does a lake go south? When does a lake get so bad that it's no longer a viable water body and a resource? We don't want to get to that tipping point, nor do we feel that we have the models that are developed to be able to point us to a date of certain. That's just not happening. But it's our charge and our watch right now to make sure, if we can, do everything that we can with our community to keep that from happening. Lakes die naturally. It's a natural process in limnology. It takes hundreds of thousands of years usually, and unless they're a smaller water body. But our system here is so unique with the hazardous substances at the bottom of the lake.
There's a comment. It seems that there are cumulative effects from the mine waste, which would be CERCLA, and the nutrient loading, which would fall under Clean Water Act, and that they should share responsibility. Do you have anything to add to that?
Couldn't agree with you more. You usually don't get one without the other. It's just the way that the Environmental Protection Agency and some of the state agencies have divided up their resources and their charges. As I mentioned before at the beginning, you'll see tribal reps usually wearing both hats. So we agree with that comment.
I agree too, and we've had a lot of conversations in the last couple of years with our partners with the tribe and EPA on how we can try and, the way laws are written, it's difficult. And so we've been trying to explore those gray areas to see how we can effectively work together to solve this problem. But I agree, it lies in both realms.
Do the tribe and DEQ share the same water quality standards?
Good question, and we do not. The tribe has our own water quality standards that were promulgated by EPA under Clean Water Act, and they are a little bit more stringent in some of the components, which is one of the reasons that coming together and being able to write a joint lake management plan was so difficult. That was one of the impasses that we had to work through, and actually work through a mediation process with the state of Idaho back in 2007 through 2009. And so, great question. But no, we do not have the same water quality standards. However, we do collect our water quality samples utilizing the same quality assurance, quality control program plans with EPA's approval.
Any other questions from people on the webinar?
Marie, was there going to be a polling question maybe provided to folks at some point?
Yeah, would you like to do that now?
If folks are not going to, if they don't have any more questions, maybe.
Yeah, let's launch that. So you could take a moment just to answer this question that should appear on your screen. It is anonymous, so feel free to answer whatever you think.
Marie, I don't know if you want to, I see a question like, where can we find recordings of this and other, while people are answering that, maybe you want to give them a little website.
Yeah, we have recorded all of these presentations and they will be shared on our website and on YouTube, and those should hopefully be posted by the end of this week or early next week. That will be at idaho.edu/ourgem, and all those videos will be there. That's a great question. We're excited to share these because I know that a lot of people weren't able to join in real time, so hopefully people can watch them at a later date. So looks like we still have a couple people filling out the poll, so I'm going to go to this next question. Is there a way to remediate some metals and still maintain a higher zinc level?
That's a good question. And I would defer to the scientific arms within our departments and governments or EPA's cleanup standards. That might be a place to see it. But what you do see is that some of these heavy metals behave so similarly that if you're going to remediate or clean up to address the concentrations of, say, arsenic and cadmium, they behave a lot alike. And so you kind of address them at the same time. But as far as keeping higher levels of zinc, I'm not sure if we want to do that necessarily. However, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. There's another question. Haven't we already seen the tipping point on some of the bays in Fernan Lake, milfoil, etc.? Some of the bays and in Fernan Lake with milfoil and other things.
Jamie, do you want this one? Or, I mean, I agree. We have, if you're a sensitive linologist in training, we are seeing changes in the bays, especially when it comes to aquatic invasive species, plants, and other non-native like fish and stuff.
Yes, we have seen some blue-green algae blooms. Well, and down in the tribe's waters, they've had algae blooms down there. And yes, Fernan and Marie could speak to this better than I could, but Fernan has been a special case with all the historic phosphorus loading and the internal nutrient cycling and feeding those blue-green algae blooms. So yes, we have seen that in some places.
Yeah. Any other questions? Let's see, I'm going to end the polling. We can share the results of those. So it looks like 58% of people think the EPA, and 36% say DEQ, and 6% say others. Do we have any other, or I don't know if you want to address that at all and talk about those results.
I don't think so. I appreciate folks participating in that poll. It's a tough question. And I also just want to say thank you all for taking time out of your lunch hour to join us. The conversation will keep on moving forward. And so your involvement is really, really important to us. So I just want to thank you.
Okay. I would echo that.
All right, any other questions? Okay. Let's see. I'm getting just some thank yous, but no other questions that I can tell. So thank you so much, Rebecca and Jamie. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to everybody who tuned in for this. Remember, we do have a presentation on Thursday. It's the last of this series. It's Dr. Kim Holzer from the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, and she'll be talking about aquatic invasive species. So we're looking forward to that. Please join us if you haven't registered already. Please do so. And as usual, there'll be a really short survey at the end of this presentation. Let me just make sure there's no final questions. Lots of thank yous coming in, but no questions. So thank you again so much, Rebecca and Jamie. And thanks for everybody for joining.